Good morning. Wanted to give you another fish update. Here are our trout swimming around. Hopefully you can see them. Trying to get as close as possible here. I don't know if you can see it or not from your perspective, but they're starting to get their markings on the side of them that we recognize as trout, those lines going vertically. There's like 4 of them, 5 of them on each trout. And those will help them when they get released into the water, camouflage and blend into the rock bed in the stream so that they won't get eaten by other bigger animals. So that's exciting. They're definitely getting bigger and maturing. They're probably about 1 inch to 1.5 inches long now, maybe 2 inches at our longest one. See, they're interested in the camera. They came to say hi. Can you see them all down there? So, we are on our next chapter this morning. We are on something about Christmas. Away in the Manger, I think it's called. All right. Away in the Manger. Christmas was in the air, and Miss Butler had us girls making gifts in home ec class. We ought to have been learning invisible mending and turning hems to make our clothes last, but Miss Butler decreed hot pads for our loved ones made by crocheting used bottle caps into circular patterns. Ina Ray was my crocheting partner, and she was all thumbs when it came to a crochet hook. Her hot pad bunched up in the middle like a skull cap. She wore it on her head until Miss Butler told her to take it off. I couldn't picture giving Grandma a hot pad made out of bottle caps crocheted together, so I let Ina Ray have mine for her mother. I hadn't thought about giving Grandma anything. Somehow, I didn't think Grandma and Christmas went together. I was lucky to have Ina Ray, though. Carlene Lovejoy was still looking straight through me, and she set the tone for the rest of the girls. I hadn't made a lot of headway with these weeks. Ina Ray heard Gertrude Messerschmidt tell Mona Veach that I wasn't as pushy as they thought I'd be, but that was as far as I got. If there was one, If there was one point in my favor, it was that I wasn't as well dressed as they'd feared. I had 2 wool skirts, one had been Mother's. The one other belonged mostly to the moths. With my 3 sweaters, I could get through the week, but I was hurting for shoes, and my winter coat was a disgrace. Carlene had 5 different outfits, top to toe, for every day of the week. She always wore silk stockings on Fridays, though some of her shoes may have been her mother's. Her sweater with drawstring neckline and pom-poms was much admired. But as Carlene said in her airy way, 7:40, considering the boys in our school, there wasn't much point in looking your best anyway. Can you imagine only having 3 sweaters and 2 pairs of pants or skirts, and that's all the clothing you had? I can't imagine. I think that would be really hard to have to do laundry all the time. But by now, Christmas was coming and the annual school Christmas program, so we all had to pull together. The entire student body was to be out at the chorus, though half of us couldn't carry a tune if it had handles. When Miss Butler ran us through Angels We Have Heard on High, we sounded like starlings in a tree. There was to be a nativity scene, and she assigned us parts. Joseph, the 3 kings, and some shepherds just about exhausted the supply of boys. Nobody wanted Augie Fluke on stage. His hair was growing out, but he looked like a plucked chicken. The girls' parts were for Baby Jesus' mother and Heavenly Hosts of Angels. The idea that a boy could be an angel never occurred to Miss Butler. The school was rocked by the news that I was to play Baby Jesus' mother. I was surprised myself. Someone was heard to remark, "What was Miss Butler dreaming of? A Chicago girl playing the Virgin Mary? The idea!" It was Carlene, and we had to come up with our own costumes. I thought I could get away with bed sheets. The program was all the Christmas some of us would have. Money was tighter than last year. The 2 topics on everyone's mind at the end of 1937 were something to eat and money. Not that I ever went hungry at Grandma's, but there was hunger around, and with Grandma, money remained a mystery. I made my way home from school one early December day, scooping snow with my open-toed shoes. Can you imagine December and having open-toed shoes? That's like sandals. but that's all she's got. Strangely, Grandma wasn't home. Just as dusk, when I was up in my room, still wearing my old plaid coat, something drew me to the window. Coming up the road by the Wabash tracks was a fearful figure, a lumbering, humped shape bent into the swirling snow. Its head was swathed in something. Strapped to its back was a long wicker basket. Its boots left black footprints behind. I hugged my skimpy coat tight and felt the empty house around me. The figure was at our fence line, and it looked up at my window and me. It was Grandma. I was down in the kitchen as she came in, shaggy with snow. She slung the big basket aside, then she untied the shawl that held her hat on. She flung Grandpa Dowdle's coat out in a chair before the fire. Underneath, she was wearing Grandpa's rubber chest waders that were like rubber bib overalls. They strained across her bosom and pulled at the shoulder straps. She was all in black rubber, almost up to her chins. Of all the figures she ever cut, this one took the cake. I often wondered what she'd buried Grandpa Dowdle in. She seemed to wear every stitch he'd ever owned. Chilly out there, she rubbed her big red hands together. My teeth is chattering like a woodpecker with palsy. Grandma, why were you out tramping the countryside in this weather? First snow, she explained. It's my best busy season. It's all work, work, work. I'll die standing up like an old ox. What good would it do me to question her more? I peered into the tall wicker basket. It was half full of shells, walnut hulls. They didn't tell me anything. I'll omit the scene of Grandma fighting her way out of all that rubber. Beside the heat of the stove, it was like shedding a skin. Somehow, she wore 2 crumpled house dresses and a cardigan sweater. Under that, a quick peek of long-handled flannel underwear, a union suit, Grandpa's. At the supper table, I mentioned that Miss Butler had picked the parks for the Christmas program, and I confided that I was to be baby Jesus' mother. They still doing the nativity scenes? Grandma said. We done them when I was a country girl in a one-room schoolhouse. What part did they give you, Grandma? Joseph, she said. And what's a camel? I was always the biggest. After I dried dishes, I opened my homework. They had homework down here, too, sadly. Miss Butler could really dole it out. Mr. Herkmeyer was no slouch. Grandma sat at the other end of the table nodding while I tried to diagram some sentences. I moved on to biology, falling into the rhythm of Grandma's snore. A Seth Thomas steeple clock stood on the high shelf. When it struck 10, Grandma jerked awake. She looked around the room astonished. It was her belief that she never slept, not even in bed. Is that the time? She pointed down the table at me. You better get booted up and bundled up. She was out of the chair, shaking down the stove. Now she reached for her hat and shawl and felt Grandpa Dowdle's coat to see if it was dry. I clutched my forehead. Grandma, it's the dead of night. But it's a moonlit night. She shimmered into her chest waders and stuffed her shirt tails aside. Oh, school is starting, 7:45. Grandma, it's a school night. I need my sleep. Sleep! You'll sleep your life away and rot in the bed. You better pull on 2 pairs of socks under your galoshes. I had galoshes, like big boots, but hated wearing them. Grandma, where are we going? After a character who's smarter than we are, she said, struggling into the coat, clutching her jaw. When I came back into the kitchen, layered like Admiral Byrd, he's the admiral that went down to Antarctica and discovered it, the South Pole. Grandma was rummaging through the mysterious wicker basket. She took inventory of various things buried in the walnut hulls. A coil of her picture wire, a handful of wooden stakes. She drew forth a small glass vial of some amber liquid. With a sly look my way, she uncorked it and passed it under my nose. I reeled back. Grandma, that smells nasty. Depends on who's doing the smelling, she rummaged, coming up with that what looked like a rabbit's foot. It was something furry off a rabbit. What's that for, Grandma? Good luck? You might say so. She stood to hoist the basket onto her shoulders. Then she remembered and made for the knife drawer in the Hoosier cabinet. Out of the drawer she drew a gun. I froze. It was nothing like the blunderbuss behind the woodbox. It was, in fact, a single-shot .22 pistol, but I didn't know that then. There was a lot I didn't know. Slipping the pistol into her pocket, she marched us both out the door, into the night. We trod the icy ridges of the road, and the town fell back behind us. A cold, cloudless moon glared on white fields. I walked in Grandma's shadow, hearing the basket thump her back and the walnut hulls dance to her step. Of course, I should be sound asleep in bed by now, and I couldn't feel my toes, and Grandma was packing a pistol. But it was a beautiful night out here, like a black and white Christmas card. The ice on the woven wire fences was a lattice work of diamonds. Ooh, I like that simile. And only Grandma and I were awake in all the stillness. At least, I hoped. We must have walked halfway to Cowgill's farm before she nudged me off the road. We jammed a gate against the drift and entered someone's field. The snow was deeper here. Grandma led the way as we kept to the fences to the far corner of the field. She put a hand to hold me back. She wore rotor gloves. Then I heard a scream too human, from down in the dipping corner of the field that the moon missed, and an answered scream froze in my throat. Grandma shrugged out of the basket and whipped the pistol from her pocket. A moonbeam glanced the black metal of the narrow barrel as she aimed into the dark corner where two fences met. What do you think is down there? She fired straight into the stream. My knees began to buckle. She was down on all fours now, the black coat fanning out in the snow, her hands busy. She worked intently, biting off one glove to use her bare hand to do whatever she was doing. She tugged at a wire, and powdery snow shook loose off a fence post. Metal clicked. Then she pulled back and held him up by the neck. It was a fox, red, though black in the moonlight. His head lolled against her fist. His eyes were black beads. But he was dead, drilled through the head to put him out of his misery. A slender stem seemed to connect his hanging mouth to the snow, but that was a thin trickle of blood. I fought the supper in my throat. So Grandma's out fox hunting. Wonder if it's legal in her area. Knowing Grandma, probably not. Grandma dropped the fox in the snow and reached for the jaw-spring trap that had caught it. A victor number 2, as I would come to know. She pulled herself to her feet and tossed the trap into the basket. The walnut holes were to disguise a human scent. So were the rubber chest waders. Oh, I had lots to learn once I was over the first shock. I'd be shocked, too, if I didn't know what we were doing and then suddenly there's a dead fox in front of me. Wonder what she's going to do with those foxes. Eat them? Skin them? What do you think? What do you do with foxes? Replacing her gloves, she plunged her whole arm into the basket and came up with another trap. She fished out the tuft of rabbit fur and the vial of amber liquid and the picture wire. Then she was down on the snow again, gasping with the work and the cold. Steam rose off her. She wired a trap to a fence post. She stuck the little flag of rabbit fur in the workings of the trap and drew the cork from the vial with her teeth. She'd driven out the wooden stake. Now she poured a little of the fluid on it. "Grandma, what is that stuff?" "It's fox urine," she said, and set the jaws of the trap. What would she use fox urine for, do you think? It smells really bad. Well, it smells really bad to Mary Alice, but would it smell bad to a fox, you think? I'm thinking it would probably attract the foxes. Maybe they would think it's like another fox in the area. It's like a lure. Once more, she dragged herself upright. We moved on along the fence. She gave me the trapping basket to carry, making me part of this. She swung the fox by his brush tail after she'd reloaded the pistol. "He's smart," Grandma said, mostly to herself, but teaching me. "Wily. He can smell me, and I can't smell him. But there's some fox in me, and I know how he thinks. He likes fence lines and standing water and ditches, and I need the snow to track him." Why would she need the snow to track him, do you think? What would help her with the snow? At least she could find his footprints. She could follow him that way. We came to 2 more of her traps. I guess I was relieved to see them empty. Then on across another pasture, a trap yielded a fox already dead. Though Grandma was quick on the trigger. I think she was glad of that. I was. She tied her 2 foxes together with twine from her pocket. She was never without twine. We followed a fresh track of prints to the edge of a frozen drainage ditch where she set another trap. How quick and sure she worked with those stiff old hands of hers. It was cold, all right. We worked back to the road by a meandering route, leaving our own tracks behind. Now she had 4 foxes twined together. When she held them up, you could see how they'd be. Fox furs with glass eyes arranged around some lady's shoulders far from here. So maybe Grandma sells them to like a fur person who makes them into like coats and things. The next day, Grandma skinned the foxes and nailed them with their pelts to the cob house wall. And when the fur broker, came around, they did a deal. He tried his best, telling her he was mainly in the market for muskrat and beaver, but she was better with foxes. And at a driving price bargain, she sold every last skin at her price. This began to clear up the mystery of where Grandma got such ready money as she had. I went out with her many a December night when the snow was on the ground. Something drew me away from the warm stove. I dreaded the scream of a trapped fox, but I'd have heard it anyway in my head at home. So I'd go out with Grandma to work her with the traps in the ebony and silver nights. Ebony's like a black color. There were little changes stirring in me. I began to notice how old Grandma was, how hard she worked herself, how far from town she'd roam on frozen nights across uneven ground. I began to want to be there with her, to make sure she'd come home safely. Do you guys ever feel like that with your parents or grandparents or someone in your family? It's hard to see them go to work or somewhere and then have to wait for them to come home. At school, we practiced for the Christmas program all month long. Miss Butler couldn't sing either, but she was a feisty director. After we'd run a low how a rose into the ground, she took it off the program. And she wasn't satisfied with our once in Royal David City. She took the Christmas program personally, as teachers do. We had our stage props now, a radiating tinfoil star and one of those mangers you see in nativity scenes and nowhere else. Baby Jesus was a battered doll with eyes that opened and closed. It was Ina Ray's. She said she'd had it when she was little, but the rumor was that she still played with it. I had a sheet shawl and drapings. Carleen Lovejoy looked straight out of Hollywood in her satin gown and wings on it as an angel. But other people whined that they weren't nearly set for the big night. In a rehearsal, both Johnson boys went bone white and fainted. They had bad cases of stage fright, though they were only shepherds. Grandma naturally took no interest, even when I complained to her about Carleen Lovejoy's halo. It was all tinsel and practically lit up. Grandma was busy, but then I wouldn't have taken her for a Christmas kind of woman anyways. Still, one day after school I found her poring over mail-order catalogs. She handed me the one from Sears, open to Fashions in Footwear for the Junior Miss and the Active Young Woman. "Pick you out a pair," she said. "Grandma, do I get a Christmas present?" I said to test her. "You need shoes," she said. "Otherwise, you'll be binding your feet in rags to get through the winter like Valley Forge." Valley Forge was the winter when George Washington's army in the Revolutionary War basically camped out in the middle of winter, and a lot of people had problems because it was so cold. They got gangrene, which is where your feet can't have the blood flow go through them, and then you have to cut them off. Anyways, point being, it's really cold, and she's gonna have a problem if she doesn't have shoes. I considered every pair on the page, trying them on in my mind. Can you imagine buying shoes from a catalog? A lot wrote on my decision. These shoes had to go everywhere I went, and there'd be room in the toes, which made my heart sing. Grandma had long grown restless when I finally made my choice. They had to be practical, with a closed toe, and still being 15, I wanted something a little older, with a Cuban heel. I knew they'd have to lace up, or Grandma wouldn't go for them. I checked off a pair, gunmetal gray, to go with everything. Grandma considered my choice, the toothpick hovering. "That them?" she said at last. "Whooey, $2.75. Her eyes filled with her spectacles. "I remember when you could shoe a whole family and the horse for that money." But then we drew paper patterns around my feet to send back for the right size. She filled out the order form with the toothpick aslant in the corner of her mouth. She stamped the return envelope. That's the only time I ever saw her use a stamp. Later, I caught her studying the catalog from Lane Bryant. Winter and spring of 1938, modes for the fuller-figured woman. But I stole away without a word. The days slipped faster off the December calendar. Tension mounted at school, and both Johnson brothers were often absent. Carleen Lovejoy preened in advance, just looking in her mirror. How do I look? Clearly, she thought her angel was going to outshine my Mary. She was going to be the Christmas program's center of attention or know the reason why. Something was coming over Grandma, too. She was jumpier than a jackrabbit. Ooh, simile. And the short days were too long for her. One evening, when it was hardly dark, she had us both out, tramping the road north. We pulled an old handmade sled of my dad's. Grandma, now where are we going? Greens, she replied. When we came upon Asbury Chapel, standing out in the open country, I noticed the graveyard. It was screened by a stand of evergreens. Grandma, I said, you wouldn't. No, she wouldn't swipe Christmas greens from a graveyard, though I'd heard it cross her mind. We tramped on to the timber in the bottoms along Salt Creek. There we found long-needled pine and blue spruce. Grandma took Augie Fluke's knife to them, and we began to stack the sled with greenery. Then, as if it was meant to be, we came upon a little fir tree. It wasn't 3 feet tall and far from full, but Grandma fell on it, and her knife gnawed away at its spindly trunk. Did she really, fall on it? She just meant she, started hacking at it. She's going to take it home for a Christmas tree. We trudged back to town with the greens tied to the sled. I went over the words, "Bring a torch, Jeanette Isabella," in my mind. Grandma was looking ahead. By the night of the program, I should have known something was up. Grandma had lit the stove in the front room for the first time this winter. A merry fire crackled behind the icing glass windows, and she was hanging a wreath out in the bay. The Christmas tree stood in a nest of cotton batting on her marble tabletop. It was decorated with a string of popcorn and pine cones from the timber. On top was a tin star she'd cut out of a can. I stood, soaking in the warmth of the room, pine-scented. The idea of going to the Christmas program herself had clearly not crossed Grandma's mind. She certainly wasn't dressed for it. I was. I had on my costume, bristling with pins, under it my new gunmetal shoes, fresh from the box, and overall last year's plaid coat. Now it had lush cuffs of red fox fur, making my sleeves look long enough again. Grandma turned on me in surprise. She looked down to see I was wearing sheets. "Grandma, it's the program tonight." Waving away her own forgetfulness, she said, "Well, then, you better wear this." She produced something from a big apron pocket. It looked like a coil of baling wire. She handed it over. It was a coil of baling wire. Twisted in it were tiny tin stars cut from cans, a day's work to make. Grandma stood back, her hands clasped, a little eagerness in her eyes. "Watch out, them stars'll dig in your scalp." She made me a halo so Carleen Lovejoy and all her tinsel wouldn't outshine me. It looked more like a crown of thorns, but I handled it carefully. I'd have come dangerously near kissing Grandma then, if she'd have let me. Then I was walking through the snow in galoshes to save my shoes. We'd done all our rehearsing at school, but the program was to be at the United Brethren Church. Though Jesus was born in a stable, the school basement didn't seem quite right. The church threw stained glass light out into the snow, and people flocked up the front steps. As I went inside, the train from St. Louis pulled in at the Wabash Depot. The whole town became a little village under a Christmas tree, with the electric train circling and the glowing cardboard houses and the steepled church sunk in cotton snow. If you think one Christmas program is like another, you didn't see ours. The robing room where we girls got ready was full of bad omens. Who knew what went on across the chancel where the boys were dressing in the choir with Mr. Herkimeyer? The girls, who were only in the choir, flapped like bats in the United Brethren choir robes. The angels were Irene Stemple, Mona Veach, Gertrude Messerschmidt, and the littlest angel was Irina Gage. None of their wings matched. Irene's were made out of, the smallest had the biggest wings, chicken wire. She could barely move in the room. It was like a bird cage in there. Then in swept Carleen Lovejoy. Her shimmering gown, cut on the bias, was meant to outdo the other angels. Her halo hovered high over her head, supported from behind. She was made up for the New York stage. She'd shaved off her eyebrows and drew on new ones. Her cheeks were pinker than nature. Her lips were deep red Cupid's bow, with fingernails to match. She was a natural blonde, and that was the only natural thing about her. Miss Butler edged into the room, and Carleen very nearly blinded her. "Carleen, wipe all that stuff off your face," she said, stricter than school. "You look like you're bleeding from the mouth." Carleen brittled and stood firm. Seeing that I was in 3 hanging sheets, Miss Butler turned to secure my costume. When I reached for my coat and drew out the baling wire halo, she nearly swallowed her pins. But there was an opening night excitement among us. Even from backstage, you could hear the rustle of the paper programs and the creak of the pews. The organ boomed, "Hark the herald angels sing," and there was no going back. The United Brethren preacher, Reverend Lutz, rose to quiet the crowd with a passage from St. Luke. Miss Butler was pushing the choir girls on. We in costume were to hang back here off stage, singing through the open door to add volume, but keeping out of sight until the nativity scene would come out. No choir boys came forth because they all were in costume, but we could see shepherds and kings in the door behind Mr. Herkimer. We sang our hearts out, on stage and backstage. Miss Butler kept the pacing peppy, though we never did get the bugs out of once in Royal David City. Then came the tricky part. We of the nativity scene had to creep low under the curtains behind the choir. Here was the stable all set up, with a cardboard sheep. I groped for my stool beside the manger. Above me, Milton Girder fell into place as Joseph. We had shepherds behind us and the kings opposite. Between us, the star, the heavenly host of so-called angels, Carling at the center stage. From what I could see of Milton, he was wearing his father's bathrobe and a false beard. The kings were beginning to hold up frankincense and myrrh. As the choir parted and broke into "Oh, Holy Night," Mr. Herkimer pulled the curtain, and the lights went upon us. Mr. Fluke was the electrician. We'd practiced how to sit stone still for up to 5 minutes. When we froze in place, I ought to have been looking into the manger at baby Jesus, but the curtain caught me staring out at the audience, so I had to stay that way. "Long lay the world of sin and error pining," sang the choir as I counted the house. The full pews gasped as we came into view, a living picture. And why not? Milton in a bathrobe and false beard, Carleen like Sally Rand without her fans, Irene looking like she was about to take off, me in baling wire and 3 sheets showing a Cuban heel. As I stared unblinking at the far door of the church, it opened, and Grandma walked in. It had to be her. She filled the door. A man was with her. I watched her scoot people along a pew and sit. The pew popped like gunfire beneath her. When the choir went into "What child is this?" the star went up and sent a beam down on Irene's doll. This was to be the high moment, and was. The moment the beam hit the manger, baby Jesus roared out a loud wail. Milton moved. A shepherd's crook clattered to the floor. I couldn't hold my pose. I shifted my crowned head to see in the spotlight manger a real, live baby, red as a beet, punching the air with tiny fists. Carleen was upstaged and went completely out of character. A wave of wonderment swept the pews. Some people may have thought a living baby had been cast in the part, and if so, whose? But then Ina Ray, flapping her wings, shrieked out, "Where's my dolly?" Miss Butler fell back, and the choir broke ranks, never to reach "We Kings of Orient Are." Reverend Lutz, Principal Fluke, and Mr. Herkimer all advanced on the manger. The wise men in street clothes, but a newborn in a damp rag for a diaper or swaddling clothes stunned them. Now people stood on pews, trying to see. Suddenly, Grandma was there, heaving up the steps past the pulpit. Her hat was alive with pheasant feathers. She reached into the manger for the red, squalling baby. She lifted it up, and the light was good. The baby had 1 blue eye and 1 green. Grandma blinked. She held it up to the audience. "It's all right. She hollered out, "It's a burdick." Oh, gosh. They talked about that Christmas program for years. In its way, it was the best one they ever had, though Miss Butler never really got over it. Of course, the baby was another reason why Mildred Burdick had never been back the first day after September. But just when the Burdicks had managed to spirit an unwanted baby into the manger, we couldn't imagine. And why they thought the whole town wouldn't know another Burdick when they saw one, nobody could say. Grandma pointed out that the Burdicks weren't broke out with brains. The general view was that the United Brethren Orphanage would find the baby a better home. That evening lay in ruins on the stable straw at our feet. But there was one more miracle. I looked up at the tall man behind Grandma, and it was Joey. Taller and leaner and handsomer, but Joey, changed in the same. And so I was looking at my Christmas in the face. I hugged the wind out of him, tangled in my sheets, nicked him in the chin with my halo. It was Joey, fresh from the west, off the evening train. Grandma had sent him the ticket. That's where most of the Fox money went. That's what it was for. I had to turn away quick. There was a lump in my throat, and that would mean tears on my face, and I didn't want Joey to see them. Then, with a rush of wings, 2 angels lit on either side of me. The gawky one was Gertrude Messerschmitt. The dumpy one was Irene Stemple. "Is that your brother, Mary Alice?" wondered Gertrude, suddenly my new best friend. "Oh, Mary Alice, honey, he looks just like Tyrone Power." Irene breathed, feathering out. But taller! Her pudgy hand found mine in the drapings, and she clung to me. Ridiculous. After we got home that night, Grandma showed me another ticket. It was a round trip to Chicago for me, so I could go with Joey and have some Christmas with Mother and Dad. It must have cost Grandma her last skin, though first we'd keep Christmas right here around the spindly tree in the front room. Just the three of us, like old summer visits, Grandma and Joey and me. But what I remember best about the evening is the three of us walking home from church. I see us yet, strolling the occasional sidewalks with our arms around Grandma, just to keep her from skidding, because she said she was like a hog on ice, and every star above us was like a Christmas star. Oh, I like that chapter a lot. How Joey comes to visit, and they all get to have Christmas together. All right. Well, I hope you guys are all reading at home. Sometimes I wonder. I don't see a lot of work sometimes, and I just hope that maybe you forgot to turn something in and you're all still working madly away. I know that it's super nice outside and y'all want to be outside. I do too a lot, but you gotta remember that you still got, gosh, what, over a month left, and we still need to keep our noses to the grindstone and keep working. Remember, about 4 hours should be what you're trying to strive for every day. So maybe, an hour or so for reading, and an hour for math, some science, and some social studies thrown in, some writing. Get some PE or music or art if you get time to. Don't forget your iStation test. A lot of you have still not taken those, and we really need to have you test for April. So get on iStation and get those done. And let me know if you have questions. I'm always available. I try to answer my phone all the time and answer emails. So if you've got anything you need help with, please feel free to let me know, and I will help you as best I can. And have a good day, everyone. I miss you. I'll see you later.